How could that many people not see the white sheet of paper? A small town chamber of commerce invites a speaker to give the address at its annual dinner. The economy in that particular city is weak. The people are discouraged. And the chamber's desire is for this speaker to, in some way, give them a boost, give them hope, give them encouragement, give them courage. She begins the presentation by taking a white sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, and taking a Sharpie marker, and coloring a black dot in the center of the paper. She holds it up and then asks members at the dinner to describe what they see. Everyone describes the black dot, but no one says a word about the white sheet of paper. You have omitted the most important thing, she says. You said nothing about the white sheet of paper. She went on to say, oftentimes in life, we are distracted by the small dot-like challenges which monopolize our attention and paralyze our energy. It happens. It happens in the people in Numbers chapter 13, and we cannot point the finger at them because it can happen to us also. Whenever we focus solely on the obstacles that are around us, the opposition that is against us, and the odds that are stacked against us, we come to the conclusion that we are like grasshoppers and giants are all around us. It happens in Numbers chapter 13. You heard the reading of the passage a few moments ago. I encourage you to begin your reading when you get home at verse 21 and follow through verse 33. But picking up from where we left off on last week, the 40-day reconnaissance mission has come to an end. You remember Moses sent out 12 spies to check out the land of Canaan. The 12 returned, although they all have seen the same thing. There are two different reports. They all agree on the size of the grapes, the supply of the grapes, and even the shape of the grapes. But where these two part ways is where the other places the but in their report. The 10 placed their but with but there are strong people there, but the cities are fortified, but the land devours its inhabitants. In summation, they see God in light of their circumstances. The minority group, the two, Caleb and Joshua, they assert their but with, but we can possess the land. In other words, Caleb and Joshua, unlike the 10 who see God in light of their circumstances, Caleb and Joshua see their circumstances in light of their God. They saw the same thing, yet they report what they've seen differently. How is that possible? Well, perspective says it all. You understand what perspective is. Perspective is how you view things. And as we make our way through this series of sermons, as it relates to possessing whatever God has in store for us individually or corporately as a congregation, today's sermon in a nutshell is simply the key to possessing whatever God says is yours is maintaining the right perspective of God. God is always who he is. He never changes. He will do exactly what he said he would do. And yet it is possible for everyone to look at one thing and give different reports. Again, the reading of the passage, an example of this, around verse 27, the 10, who were the majority in this case, they look out and they begin their report by saying, we went and spied out the land as you have sent us, meaning Moses. You remember that from last week, verse number 1. But they left the most important part of it out. You remember God, there was a monologue between God and Moses. God was doing the talking and Moses was doing the listening. And God says, send men to spy out the land, here it is, that I am giving to you. The 10 left that part out. And so as we look at this passage today, the same word to them is the same word to us. And that is, what are you saying about what you see? I mean, what is your perspective of God? Things change, people change, but God is the same yesterday as he is today and vice versa. He is the same God. So there's a question for you to answer. I've already answered it as I was preparing. Now it's your turn. How are you handling the opposition that is against you? How are you handling the obstacles that are around you? And how are you handling the odds stacked against you? In this passage, there's opposition. There are obstacles. And there are odds that the people are confronted with. The A clause of verse number 28 gives us the first example of opposition. They say, yeah, we saw the grapes and all of that. We saw all of that. But we also saw some people. And they are strong. You remember Deacon Crenshaw reading that? They are, it's the A clause of verse 28. They are strong. It's opposition. Every piece of land is occupied. Every major geographical area is occupied by ites. The Negev, it is occupied. The hill country, it is occupied. The land near the sea, it is occupied. The Jordan Valley, it is occupied. There are ites everywhere. Amorites, Amalekites, Gittites, Hittites, Canaanites. Ites are everywhere. And these ites are against the Israelites. And you hear the report of the two. Yeah, we saw the grapes, but we saw people. They are strong people. So how do we handle that kind of opposition? You know, here is where we could take a lesson from the Alaskan bull moose in terms of how to deal with opposition. National Geographic did a special on the males. The male of these species compete for dominance in the fall. They fight one another. They literally do head to head with their antlers. They are clashing and they are colliding. And sometimes they will lose antlers during the battle. And of course, that is imminent danger. That means that particular moose is over. Defeat is imminent. But it is said that the heftiest moose, the largest moose, actually wins the battle in the summer. Because in the summer is when they eat continually and they build up their immune system, their strength. And so the battle is actually won in the summer. It only starts in the fall. You could call this the bull moose principle, and that is, don't wait to develop your faith when you get in a battle. You develop your faith before the battle begins. And Paul would remind us that every day that you and I are alive, we ought to put on what? The whole armor of God, starting with the head and working all the way down to our feet, making sure that our physical person is covered, but also with this battle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities and wickedness in what? High places. And every child of God is always engaged in spiritual warfare. Because we have an adversary in the devil who has come to do what? Kill, steal, and destroy. That's his strategy. So you are always engaged, always. Sometimes more intense than others, but I guarantee you, the devil is always trying to take you out. He is trying to steal your joy. He is trying to confuse your mind. He is attacking everything that God has in store for you. I want to caution you today. Don't fall asleep at the wheel in that. Make sure that your faith is built up in the Lord Jesus Christ. And when you think nothing is going on, it's because he's plotting and planning and preparing to attack. So how do you handle opposition? How do you handle it? By preparing to make sure that you're prayed up, making sure that you're read up, making sure that your worship is ongoing. It is continuously. Because we have an adversary in the devil. He is always against you. He is always against you. That's our opposition. Whatever God has in store for you, it is yours. It's yours. But how do you possess it? How do you stay in the right mindset? How do you prepare to possess it? Well, it's by maintaining the right perspective of God. Caleb, he does this. But then not only do we see opposition, and we hear what the minority say about it, the people are what? Strong. That's all they do is talk about the people. They don't talk about God. But then in the same verse, we pick up with that B clause of verse 28. We first hear the people are strong. That's the opposition. Remember, ites are everywhere. But then they bring up, they say the cities are what? Fortified. The walls are fortified. Archaeological exploration suggests that the walls of this particular city at this particular time were 30 to 40 feet high. And they were 15 feet thick. You measure from that wall to nearly over here. That's how thick the walls were. They're fortified. And that's what the minority report. They say these walls, they are fortified. And that's an obstacle. What do you do with obstacles? How do you handle them? Some of you have probably heard the name Goodyear. Anybody? Goodyear, the tires. Well, in the early years, automotive industry, the tires were hard and inflexible. This is about 1821. And everybody complained about them, but only Charles Goodyear did something about them. He had done his research and he was trying to come up with a means that would prevent the tires from being brittle during the winter and soft and sticky in the summer. And I mean, he had tried experiment after experience. He'd experienced one failure after the next, but he kept on doing it. And then in 1839, he struck gold. He accidentally dropped a piece of rubber that had been treated with sulfur on a hot stove. And this later would be called the process of vulcanization. That is, whenever rubber and sulfur come together at a hot temperature, it produces the properties that have made up the tires that you and I have on our automobiles today. So the next time you're going down a bumpy road and your tires absorb the shock, preventing the enamel from your teeth from cracking, you ought to say thank you to a man named Charles Goodyear, who saw an obstacle as an opportunity to cross over into greatness. That's what he saw it as. That's the reason why Joshua sees also this as an opportunity for the nation to cross over into greatness. You remember the report of the 10, the people are strong, the fortified cities. And let me just say this parenthetically, that whenever somebody's report is not according to what God says, then somebody else who has faith ought to say something. The 2 said we can't do it, but the 10 say we can't do it. But the 2 said, with God all things are what? Possible. I wish I had some help in here. And whenever people are not walking by faith, somebody who is walking by faith ought to do something. That's why Caleb says something. But we are able. That's what he said in verse number 30. We are well able to do it. Not because we are strong, but our God is strong. And so Canaan is simply an obstacle that God will overcome, that he might fulfill his plans and his purpose for his people. Aren't you glad that can't nobody stop your God? Aren't you excited that what God has for you is for you? Can't nobody rob it. Can't nobody take it from you. No one can defeat our God. And you know why? You know why Caleb says something? Because Caleb remembers what God did to the other obstacles. He has a faith file on God. He's been keeping copious notes of how God has fought every one of his battles. And Caleb remembers what God did when they were in Egypt. He brought them out of Egypt. Caleb remembers what God did at the Red Sea. God opened the Red Sea and they walked across on dry ground. Caleb remembers what God did to Pharaoh's army. They got drowned in the Red Sea. And whenever you are faced with obstacles, you got to put your mind on rewind and say, if God did it back then, he can surely do it again. What about you? Do you remember what God has done for you? Any doors were closed in your face and God opened them? Was it ever dark in your life and God was your light? Was there anything that you needed that was beyond your reach and God made the high places low? Then let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Our God is a mighty God, a powerful God, a strong God. He cannot fail. That's our God. That's the God of the Bible. If you're going to possess what God has in store for you, you've got to maintain the right perspective of God. Not how you feel about God, not who you say God is, but you've got to quote what God has said concerning himself back to yourself. Is his word about himself? Well, you will have opposition because you belong to God. That's what Jesus would tell those disciples. You know, just like they persecuted me, And those that persecuted before you, they're going to persecute you. He said, but be of good cheer because I've already overcome the world. You're going to have opposition. And Satan will use anybody who raises their hand. He will use people to come against you. That's opposition. Life happens. And sometimes the bottom in life falls out. And either you are going to handle it by faith and with God's word, or life is going to have his way with you. Well, opposition attacks. Obstacles are around you. But then, how do you handle when the odds are stacked against you? What do you do when everybody is saying you ain't gonna make it? Or what happens when you are saying that to yourself? When the odds are stacked against you. You drop in verse number 30, and we hear them mention, Deacon Crenshaw read it earlier. I mean, Joshua said, listen, we can do it. God is for us. God is giving this land to us. And we can possess it. We are able to possess it. And guess what? The two come back and say, no, we can't. We can't. Because, here it is a land that devours its inhabitants. You know what they are saying with that? That is their revision of what God has said. They're saying the opposite of what God has said. God says it's a land flowing with what? Milk and honey. In essence, life. Fertile. Productive. Nothing wrong with it. It's pure. But they say it's a land of death. It devours its inhabitants. They say it's a death wish. They say there's nothing there but destruction. They say there's nothing there but defeat. And how is it that one group says it's what God says it is, and the other group says it's something totally opposite of what God has said? Again, perspective says it all. Have you noticed that there's a common setup in nearly all fitness centers across America? You go to Planet Fitness and a couple of those, and I guarantee you will see televisions on walls. You can also see some screens mounted on the equipment itself. And what happens is, what's on the TV can grab your attention so that you're more concerned about what you see on the screen than completing the workout that you came to fulfill. It can arrest your attention so much so that it dictates and determines your actions. That's what happens with the 10. They saw the strong people. They saw the fortified cities, and they saw the sons of Anak. They would even mention Nephilim, translated fallen ones from heaven. It was mythological that they would mate with humans and giants would be the offspring. But scholars suggest that they would literally add this to the story so that the two spies were literally telling lies. And so it was the lies of the spies. But guess what can happen? Some people can believe a lie over a truth. For some people, a lie is true. And other people, the truth is a lie. And not to say too much about it because I'll address it next week. When you pick up with chapter 14, the first few verses, I want you to hear how their lie affected everyone. The congregation rose up and turned on the leadership. The people complained. And they turned against the leadership, Moses and Aaron, and they refused to go into the land. For some people, a lie is the truth. And for others, the truth can be a lie. It's all about perspective. If you're going to possess what God has said is yours, you got to maintain the right perspective of God. You will have opposition. You will have obstacles. The odds will be stacked against you again and again. And to handle those types of scenarios, you're going to need the Word of God and the God of the Word. It's about perspective. You know, I grew up watching the Super Friends, and these were all the superheroes. And later on, they would pick up with the Avengers, and they would have all these superheroes. And I was watching Superman movie. And in the movie, there was a man in a burning building. He's at on the top floor, and Superman flies in the burning building, rescues the man from the top floor. He delivers him, and as Superman is flying through the skies, holding the man looks at Superman and said, "It's a long way down. Superman, please don't drop me." And Superman says, "Now wait a minute. Do you think that since I've entered a burning building, I rescued you from the top floor, do you think I did all of that just to take you out and to drop you before taking you home?" It's perspective. He saw how high he was up, and he became afraid. And what he saw with his eyes, he forgot that he was in the hands of Superman. Listen, do you know whose hand your life is in? Do you know who's been taking care of you all of your life? Do you know who has brought you through seen and unseen dangers? Do you know who has been fighting for you when you didn't even know you was in a battle? Do you know who has opened doors for you that was closed in your face? Do you know who keeps on watching over you 24/7? Do you know the one who has you in his hands? I know who's carrying me. I've been through enough to know that it was nobody but God taking care of me, watching over me. I love the song, I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roll. I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus telling me to fight on, because he promised he would never leave me alone. The key to possessing whatever God says is yours is maintaining the right perspective of God.